Oftentimes when we think we're in a plateau, we really aren't. People will not drop weight for 1 to 2 weeks and panic. We don't like to see that. I really don't think a true plateau happens unless we haven't dropped weight for about 4 to 6 weeks. So there are going to be those weeks where we just don't drop weight, and those are hard weeks mentally and emotionally. So if we can develop that resilient mindset, not the black and white thinking, more open, then we're able to push through those weeks where it's not ideal and we haven't dropped the weight.
Welcome to the Dr. Ashley Show.
Welcome to the Dr. Ashley Show. I'm Dr. Ashley, and today I have a guest with us. Her name is Dr. Morgan Nolte. She's the owner and founder of Zivly, which is an online course and coaching program that helps adults reverse insulin resistance for long-term weight loss and disease prevention. Now, I've had Dr. Nolte on the show before and enjoyed our time together so much that we wanted to do a part 2 where we focus on helping you bust through these dreadful and painful weight loss plateaus. So without further ado, I welcome Dr. Morgan Nolte to the show. So Dr. Nolte, today we're going to talk about weight loss plateaus.
Yes, I'm excited. And just for our listeners, this is a shared episode. So it's going on both of our podcasts because we feel like we just wanted to come together, have a conversation that we have with our members a lot, but we also wanted to bring to our broader podcast communities on what do you do about weight loss plateaus. So just kind of two coaches talking shop. Hope you get some value from this episode and maybe some new insights if you're struggling with a plateau too.
That's right.
All right. So the first thing that we wanted to talk about was what are the main types of weight loss plateaus? So if someone's coming to you and they're like, I have been trying so hard and I'm not losing weight. Where does your mind go on like what the potential causes could be?
So I think that there are two main types of plateaus. And the first one is more psychological, mental, and emotional. And I would say the second type is more metabolic, physical, physiologic. And I find that for me, probably 95% of the plateaus we see come from the mental and emotional side. But I'd love to get your perspective.
Yeah, it's fun when we were putting these show notes together. I was reading through yours and we have such similar philosophies on everything. And I typically do another one, which is a circumstantial weight loss plateau. And I think that's because I was developing our plateau information in our program when I was postpartum. And so there are certain seasons in life that I think, yes, you're going to be limited in how much weight you can lose because of external circumstances. I'm very much a proponent of letting your internal drive your external. But if you have a baby that you want to breastfeed, that you're choosing to breastfeed, you're going to have to eat food and drink water and nourish your body in a way to sustain your breast milk supply. And you may be sleeping very, very poorly. Our kids were terrible sleepers. For 3-4 years, we did not get a full night of sleep. And we know that sleep really impacts weight. And so I just gave myself grace during that season. And I said, the other thing too is exercise. You're limited in what types of exercise you can do postpartum safely for your pelvic floor. And it just takes time to get that body back. And so I think that there are certain seasons where either you're dealing with a very acute situation like postpartum, or maybe you have a sudden illness or an emergency in the family that's requiring, all of your attention or more than maybe what you were giving it before, like the death of a parent can be a very stressful season, or maybe your mom falls and she's in the hospital and you're her full-time caretaker. Stuff like that, I think, can lead to a circumstantial weight loss plateau that requires a little bit of extra grace, patience, and time. So that was one. And then the other, mental, which I completely agree with you. Most weight loss plateaus are mental. And I kind of subcategorize those two into self-satisfaction or self-sabotage. And so the self-satisfaction ones, I say, like, you've done the work, you've lost the weight, you're at a healthy weight. You could stop and you could be considered completely healthy. You don't have any disease. Your clothes fit. You're satisfied with things, right? So I think that was something I wanted to tease out from you as we go along is, man, how do you know if you're in maintenance or if you're at a plateau? And so that's kind of one thing. And then the other one is the self-sabotage, which is more common. And that's where people aren't consistent with their behaviors that are required to lose weight and keep it off. And that inconsistency of behavior is usually stemming from some sort of thought that's driving an emotion, that's driving an action. And so that's really where this mental side that both of us are so passionate about comes into play from a weight loss standpoint. And that's really all about consistency. It's about discipline. I know people hate that word, but I think it's an important word to talk about. And then the other one is the physical weight loss plateau. And I think these ones are a bit more straightforward. So if it's a physical weight loss plateau, you make a change in the diet, you make a change in the exercise, or you recommend it, they do it and they see the results, So I think that those typically to me seem to be a little bit more straightforward than kind of the messy mindset stuff that leads to those self-sabotaging weight loss plateaus. So that's how I categorize them, pretty similar to you.
If we start with the more mental and emotional type of plateau, I find that one reason why we hit those is if we have a fear of getting to a lower weight. If there's something that negatively happened in our past, potentially something that was associated with an unpleasant circumstance scenario. So, for example, I had a client who her husband passed away and he was the love of her life. And she said that she just didn't eat during that time and when he was very sick. And that was her target weight with us. And she's like, oh my gosh, I just don't think I can get there because it reminds me of him. It reminds me of him not doing well. It reminds me of his passing and how I was so depressed over it. And so she associated that target ideal healthy weight for her as something negative. And then when she did get there in the past, she did it through stress and not eating. So it didn't look like it was a healthy weight. People would say, are you okay? Are you sick? And so we really had to work on her mindset around that weight because it was actually a really healthy, positive place for her to be. And we did it slowly and carefully in a supportive way. And when she did get there, she recognized that it could be done in another way and it could feel totally different. And she is maintaining as of 6 years now that healthy place. So I just want people to be aware that if you have a negative connotation with that leaner weight, that can be a big deal and it can stop the body subconsciously from getting there.
And I think that we could delineate that as like a fear of failure or a fear of success too. So I think there's that negative connotation. And there's two other examples that I have. I like sharing examples because I think people can see themselves in the examples. And the one was a client who got unwanted attention when she was younger and at a lower weight. And so she associated that with being unsafe. So a lower weight meant emotional unsafety. And the other person, kind of a similar circumstance where the weight was a shield because she was afraid of somebody actually seeing her. And so she'd been divorced and she was fearful of that attention and not necessarily happy with what's on the inside and didn't really want to get close to somebody. And so the weight protected her from the need to get, or the opportunity, I should say, to get close to somebody again. And then the other thing is I had a client who said the weight was the last thing keeping her relatable to the friends, and so her friends were like, oh, you have such a good career and your kids are so successful and you have such a great marriage and, oh, you're so well off. And, but they still had that weight as the common denominator, linking them together as something that she could still relate with them.
Yeah.
And that was a mental block too.
A lot of people got upset with Adele when she dropped weight because I think they could still connect with her on that level. And then when she got lean, they're like, what the heck? Why'd you do this to me?
Yes. Yeah. And I think, I don't know. I think that the negative connotations with weight is important, but also the experience. Like you said, I think a lot of people have dropped weight in the past, like with yo-yo dieting, and it was a miserable experience for them and they couldn't maintain it. And they think because of that past experience that they project their future experience will be based on the past experience, which isn't necessarily true. And they're like, well, I can't do that again. I can't starve myself. And why would I if I can't maintain it? And so they come with those preconceived notions about how getting to their goal weight is going to be. And it's going to be all or nothing, and they can't give it all, so they're not going to give anything. And I think that really stems into that all or nothing mindset.
Definitely. Another one that I see is people not believing that they can actually achieve this target weight. For the reasons that you mentioned, maybe they think they'll have to work out like they did the college days when they were doing 2-a-days, or that they'll have to starve themselves, or maybe they just haven't seen that weight ever and they don't think they're going to be able to see it.
Oh, you got to see it to believe it. I think that's totally wrong. I think we have to believe it to see it.
I think, yeah, that's probably the first step. We got to believe that we can be there. And then we do have to visualize that. That's a really big deal. And I take it from an athletic perspective. So, we see these Olympic level downhill skiers up at the top of the hill, and they've got their eyes closed. They're visualizing themselves going down this run perfectly. And I've met with quite a few clients who maybe they can believe they can do it, but when I ask them, what does 160 look and feel like? They say, gosh, I have no idea. And so we have a practice at PhD where we sit with our clients and they close their eyes and we help them to visualize, what does it look like? What does it feel like? What does it smell like? Who are you with? What are you wearing? And I promise you, if you do that, you believe in your heart that you can achieve it, and you sit there and visualize what it looks and feels like with all of your senses, then it opens the door to allowing that to be a reality. And I had a client who was just 5 pounds away from her ideal healthy weight. And I asked her, she was just stuck for the last 3 weeks. And I said, what do you think's going on? She's like, I don't know. I'm just so close. Like, this is just so painful. I'm like, well, can you visualize yourself so what that looks and feels like with just 5-10 more pounds down? She's like, no, I can't. I've never been there. I can't see it. So I said, all I want you to do, the only thing I want you to do differently is to, before you go to bed, lay down, close your eyes, and visualize what that looks and feels like. And I'm kidding you not, she came back the next week and she was down another 5 pounds.
Oh my goodness.
So we just have to believe in ourselves. And I know that sounds kind of like positive thinking that a lot of people get frustrated with, but it is very true. And then we need to be able to visualize it as well.
I think to piggyback on that is visualizing your actions. And so I like to think about, what is the version of myself who has already reached this goal? What are they eating? How are they holding themselves accountable? How are they exercising? And then if we can create that future vision of ourselves and use auto-suggestion, which is, the repetition of thought to oneself. So I like to do a visualization every morning for my goals. I recorded it on my phone using the voice memo app. And then I listen to it every morning in a really quiet, calm state. And I think that's one way to incorporate repetition, because our brain is so forgetful, and you can't just go to that visualization once and expect your brain to follow suit when there's been decades of wiring that that tell you maybe that's not a realistic weight, or that's not possible for you, or why are you believing that, or it's going to take too much work. And I think helping create that clarity around, okay, what are the behaviors that I'm doing at my goal weight, and accepting and rejecting ideas from the goal. So would the future version of myself eat that right now? Would the future version of myself stay up for another episode, or would they go to bed? How would the future version of myself respond to this excuse that I don't feel like exercising today? And so always kind of making decisions from that goal instead of making decisions to the goal, I think is helpful to like reverse engineer the process. And you can't do that, if you don't visualize. And I think very often people know what they don't want. And they're like, oh, I don't want to feel tired anymore. I don't like my clothes. I don't like my job. I just don't like my blood sugar numbers. And I'm like, okay, this is like you going to a restaurant and telling them everything that you don't want. Like, how are you supposed to manifest better health if you don't know what you want? So I think that that's a really good overlooked point that you bring up on that belief and that visualization. So what are some other strategies that you have besides getting really clear on the visualizing of you at the goal weight? What does that look like? What does that feel like? What actions are you doing? Maybe using some auto-suggestion strategies to get the repetition in. What are some other like mental, emotional weight loss strategy busting methods that you have?
I think continuing to support a resilient mindset, because oftentimes when we think we're in a plateau, we really aren't. People will not drop weight for 1 to 2 weeks and panic. We don't like to see that. I really don't think a true plateau happens unless we haven't dropped weight for about 4 to 6 weeks. So there are going to be those weeks where we just don't drop weight, and those are hard weeks mentally and emotionally. So if we can develop that resilient mindset, not the black and white thinking, more open, then we're able to push through those weeks where it's not ideal and we haven't dropped the weight. We drop weight in different patterns, some people in a stair-step fashion. So there might be 2-3 weeks where they don't drop anything, and that's completely normal for some people. It's frustrating.
Yes.
But then the next week or the next 2 weeks, they drop the weight to make up for the difference of it. So understanding that when you have those tough weeks on the scale, there's other things that we can celebrate and focus on, and that you've just got to keep going and keep doing the right things, keep doing what you know is right, and then the outcomes will happen. I'd say another tactic is to have compassion with yourself. Stop beating yourself up. I see clients all the time who are like, I worked so hard, and the weight's just not coming off. Why isn't it? And they're just beating themselves up and increasing stress. And we know when we have elevated stress and elevated cortisol levels that the weight's not going to fall off. It's going to do the exact opposite that we want to have happen. So just having compassion. And then my last tactic here is to work on changing our state. And this is a big thing from Tony Robbins,
Yeah. Talk about that, because that's a fun one. And
Yeah.
I think a really practical and easy to implement one too.
He says where your focus goes, your energy flows. So if we can change our state, getting away from the negative, then it's going to just help us get out of our funk, and we can change our state as quickly as we can snap our fingers. And we do that by changing our environment. So I was with a group of PhD clients in one of our group programs, and I was talking about changing our state, and I asked them how they did. And 98% of them said that they went outside, And I think it's just something about connecting with the earth and seeing the sun or feeling the fresh air on your face is really helpful to change your state. Some people would listen to music, and that's really helpful. Some people like to go exercise, go for a run or a walk. That was common. And then I'd say a small percentage would choose to meditate or pray or whatever that might be. That's helping them to connect to their source. And so I think those are the most common things I see from people to help them change their state. What about you?
Oh, for the state changers, I agree with you completely. I was just kind of thinking about other strategies as you were talking about that, and questions, like from a mental weight loss plateau. I think we have to go deep into ourselves and ask ourselves the hard questions. And I don't know about you, but I feel like people who are really serious about losing weight are students. They're students of strategy often. And I think we have to be students of ourselves more than anything, and our own behavior. I really find like a morning and an evening meeting is helpful. Do you coach your clients on some sort of like daily mindset activity, or what does that look like for you guys?
Yeah, so for us, we help them establish a type of morning routine that includes some kind of awareness or meditation or prayer, whatever that is for that person, some breathing, some kind of priming work. And then in the evening, we talk about reflection. We also have audio sessions that are available to our clients that work with binaural beats and retrain the pathways of the brain. Which is really helpful because that can help to change the way we look and feel and think about food. And those are huge to breaking old habits and changing the way we react to common scenarios that come up in our lives.
Yeah. Will you explain the beats that you just said? Because people might not be familiar with what those are, how to use them.
Yeah, well, it's just a type of audio that is usually baked into someone talking or some kind of music. And sometimes you can't even hear it. Other times it's just kind of feels and sounds like a pulse. And it works to retrain the neural pathways in the brain. And it's really, really effective for quite a lot of people. And ours really talk about, they talk about all different things about how, like I just said, how to think and feel about food. And a lot of times the voice on these audio sessions talk about turning processed foods, for example, into black and white images, and the healthy foods, the proteins and the fruits and the, the veggies that we're focusing on are really bright and vivid and colorful. And our clients will say they go to the grocery store and the foods that they're focusing on are all bright, and then everything else is black and white. We
That's
talk
really
about
cool.
on these audios, like seeing a stop sign in front of certain foods or certain behaviors, and they see that stop sign. So it just really changes the way that we think and feel. And I know I've said that a few times, but that's how it works. And it's really effective.
And do people just kind of do them when they want to, or like kind of work into like a morning routine? I'm going to do this audio today, sort of thing.
Yeah, research shows that our brain is more open to stimulus in the morning, which is why, you guys, we shouldn't be on our phone or on the screens in the morning. I always advise give ourselves 1 hour where we don't tap into screens. And so that can be a really good time to do that. And for these audio sessions, we always encourage some kind of headphones or earbuds to cancel out other noises, and to do it in a place where you can close your eyes and not be distracted or influenced by other people for about 40 minutes or so.
Nice. Okay. So there's the audio to the black and white for the processed foods, the stop sign in front of certain foods. Those are just like nice little visuals too. Any other visuals that you can think of from those audios?
He'll say, drinking water and how it feels, and making an analogy to like being under a waterfall and how it feels so cleansing. And so then when people are drinking, they're kind of feeling the body and feeling themselves cleanse.
Anything else on the mental plateaus that you wanted to cover besides, being self-accountable, the morning routine, the evening routine, the reflection questions, using some, is it binaural audio beats with some specific food messaging on how we should try to think and feel about food? Anything else on that?
I think we did a good job covering it. I think we should dive into more of the metabolic side.
How do you know if somebody has a physical plateau versus the mental and emotional one?
I would say I tackle metabolic ones first.
Okay.
Usually they're a bit more simple and clear cut.
Mm-hmm.
So if we go through all of the metabolic reasons why one might be stalled in their weight loss, and they seem to none of them pertain, then we'll move on and we'll be like, okay, it's a bit more mental and emotional.
Mm-hmm.
And the majority of them are that way. So that's how I start.
Okay. I like to just in my mind, there's like the physical at the top, and then there's branches down into causes of physical weight loss plateaus.
Yeah.
So what would you say are the biggest contributors to those types of plateaus?
I would say that number one is the body can adapt. It can adapt to our exercise routine. If we chronically undereat, the metabolism will slow, and then we're dealing with a slower metabolism. If we have yo-yo dieted a lot and we've lost a lot of muscle mass, then that can make our metabolism a little bit more challenging. And then we feel we should be dropping this excess fat weight by how we're eating, but really it's not supportive of weight loss. I call that the creep. And that is when we have these things start to creep back in and we don't even recognize it because they're pretty darn sneaky. So that would be like old habits and behaviors. Maybe some alcohol. We used to completely cut it out maybe in the first 6 or 8 weeks, and then we get a little bit complacent maybe, or confident, and that's fine. But perhaps we add some alcohol in once per week and our body can tolerate that. And we're like, well, that's fun. Let's try a little bit more and a little bit more. And then we think, gosh, I'm really not doing much more than I was. And I'm not seeing the weight drop anymore. Maybe we add back in sweet coffee drinks or Gatorade. Maybe we're eating after dinner when before we really had cut it off right after that meal. I think, cheese and nuts are addictive.
Oh, yeah.
They're trigger foods. They're so dense. And so maybe we cut those out before and now we're like a little bit's okay. Maybe our kid wanted peanut butter, and so we brought a jar of peanut butter home, and we're just in that once in a while, not thinking it's happening very often. We're not measuring anymore. Maybe we're eating bites of our kids' food, or we're with our grandkids and we're eating some of their goldfish. It was a trip, and we used to not even have access to that. Yeah. My tendency is to work through my exercise time. So, maybe we were more diligent and now we're like me and sometimes work through that. or we're not sleeping well, we have high stress. We don't think that stress and sleep influence our weight loss, but they are huge
Huge.
with
Yeah.
that.
And in
So,
so many ways, not just hormonally on like if you're stressed and the cortisol goes up and then your blood sugar goes up and then your insulin goes up or you're sleep deprived. Some research shows higher ghrelin or hunger hormone. Other just kind of suggests that appetite in general is increased. But then your satiety is reduced with that sleep deprivation on a hormonal level. And
mhm.
with stress, this NPY is released, and then we have more carb cravings. And so there's just so many things that contribute to
Yeah.
weight gain from chronic stress and sleep deprivation. I had to jot in there just to like be like, yes, I agree. And
Mhm.
here's why.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, I mean, I would say that those are the biggest things. Oftentimes, maybe we're trying to drop this weight on our own. We think we're doing everything right. It's so frustrating. I get messages, comments like this on YouTube, like this never works for me. And I'm like, you can't knock it until you try it with someone overseeing you. It's just like if we use the analogy of, let's say, a master golfer and he's practicing his swing over and over and he just can't get it right. He feels like his elbow is perfectly in place, and then he's got a coach who comes in and just moves the elbow like a centimeter or something, not even an inch, just the smallest bit, and oh my gosh, his swing totally turns out to be amazing. um, the same thing happens when you have an outside perspective on your diet and your lifestyle. And I
Yep.
promise you, if you are listening to this and you've done this all on your own and you are frustrated, weight loss is complicated. It is much more complicated than calories in and calories out. I'm not saying that we defy the laws of thermodynamics. It's definitely in there, but man, it's complicated and it's very, very helpful to have an outside perspective.
Yeah.
So,
I agree. And I think just getting to know those like thoughts behind the eating. So you mentioned the cheese and the nuts. And I
mhm,
like to say like low insulin foods they still have calories too.
mhm,
And so like even if they don't raise your insulin, like they might still be contributing to a weight loss plateau. And like the justification that I gave myself for the banana muffins are, oh, they're healthy, they're not bad. They're not that bad. And so
mhm.
I'm just, I'm getting to know my own internal dialect. And that's what I want people to do is get to know what foods you tend to justify more. How can we reduce exposure to those foods? How, like, like the stop sign before the foods.
Mhm.
It's like, I'm sure when you said that, okay, put a stop sign before certain foods. I'm guessing most people thought of like cupcakes, cakes, candy, donuts, but I think that stop sign should be in front of any food that we continually overeat and that we know is not conductive to our weight loss goals. Even
Mhm.
if it's a healthy food, it might be the nuts, it might be the cheese. And so I wanted to kind of point that out to people too, that it's not always the unhealthy foods that are the culprit here.
Yeah.
So from a physical standpoint, what would you suggest somebody do? Like, do you like the habit tracker or do you start with nutrition? Do you start with exercise or stress or sleep? Like, do you have kind of an order that you kind of a checklist that you go off?
Mhm. We always start with nutrition,
Okay.
probably because we're biased. No, because it works. So we look at nutrition and go through all the areas. And all my coaches, we all have a checklist. And we're like, okay, figuring out, asking about different symptoms and signs so we can kind of dive in and see what it might be. So that's where we start. Then we usually talk about the stress and the sleep is definitely right there with it. And then we dive into movement
Okay.
and adapt that, really focusing on a 30-minute brisk walk every day, doing some kind of heavy lifting, not heavy where you're going to hurt yourself or CrossFit, or it doesn't have to be lifting weights, but overloading the muscles in some way. We want to make sure we do that. And if someone's already there with those types of movement, then we might add in some high intensity interval training to really work with the muscles and drain that glycogen and help support metabolic rate there. So we play along with that. And then, I talk about reverse dieting, which I don't love
Yeah.
that term, but I
Tell me
think
about
that can be helpful for someone, especially as they're entering into maintenance. Potentially their calories are a bit reduced from dropping weight. And we want to get those calories to be, as high as possible so we can eat as much as we can. So with that, my suggestion is to start keeping track of what you're currently consuming. So we know your current caloric intake. And I'm not huge with trackers. I don't love them.
I was wondering. Yeah.
I think we can create number monsters and not listen to what our body's actually telling us. But with this, if we're diving into reverse dieting, I think it's important for a little bit of time. So we track what we're consuming, understand our baseline calories, and then work to increase them by about 50 to 100 calories a day. And that's confusing, so I want to explain what that means. That would be like for a week, we're adding 1 egg into our usual intake. So it's not like 1 egg on Monday and then 2 eggs and then 3 eggs. It's just 1 egg a day for a whole week. And
Gotcha.
then we make sure that we're maintaining, everything's feeling good. And if so, then we'll pump it up another 50 to 100 calories a day, which is not very much. That's like half of a tablespoon or less of oil. So then the next week we might have that hard boiled egg and a little bit more oil on or salad dressing or a string cheese, and then we keep that for a little bit, make sure everything's good and reaching a new level of homeostasis. And then we might pump up a little bit more until we get to that healthy number of calories that can support our bodies in maintenance. So those are my tactics. I'd love to hear from you.
I like that. I especially like the maintenance one. I think that when people get to maintenance, sometimes they feel like they're like floundering, like, oh my gosh, what do I do now? And I think that that's a really wise piece of advice is like, okay, well, track your food to kind of figure out where can I maintain, and then to strategically increase 50 to 100 so that you can really be confident that with this current sleep, stress, physical activity, this dietary pattern, you can have this much food and still maintain. And if you're starting to gain, like this is kind of your maintenance numbers. I agree with you. I think on everything, my first question is always like, are you doing your daily mindset routine? And so I'm a big believer that having some sort of system of self-accountability is so important, because otherwise the nutrition, because you guys have like weekly one-on-one coaching,
Right.
but we don't necessarily have that. And so we want to develop a little bit stronger self-accountability from the get-go. And so it's like, if we're going to give you the recommendation to change your nutrition, I want you to be able to hold yourself accountable and like meet with yourself to be sure that you're actually following through. So I think that most physical weight loss plateaus, it's tricky because I feel like the mental are so much more common.
Yes.
That one really does go back to the mental. It's like, if you're not doing your daily meeting routine, then it's a mental, and we're not even talking about a physical. Okay, but that is my first question on any plateau. And that's how I can start to delineate on if it's mental or if it's physical. If they're not continuing with their daily mindset routine, I can almost guarantee that it's a mental weight loss plateau. If they are doing that, then I typically look at their sleep. So how's your sleep? And then we work into nutrition, like the specifics, on how many grams of protein are you eating per meal? What's your carbohydrate intake like right now? How consistent are you with your nutrition? Those types of things. And the exercise, I'm very much similar to you. Sometimes I might say like add a walk after a meal versus like a 30-minute brisk walk anytime. I think if we can time it after the meal for blood sugar, that can sometimes be more effective, or even like breaking it up can be more effective. It kind of depends on their goal, and we're focusing on weight loss here, not necessarily blood sugar, but often they go hand in hand. So I agree with everything you said. I think starting with, but just again, like I usually start with the mindset side and then kind of dive into the nutrition. And I think it's important to recognize that there's other aspects for physical weight loss plateaus. Like some medications are going to be part of like your baseline weight. And so if somebody's taking a statin or some blood pressure medications or some antipsychotic medications, like for depression or anxiety, those can all raise your basal set weight. So if you're trying to lose weight, it might be worthwhile considering, how are my medications contributing to my body set weight here? And the other thing that's going to contribute to a set weight is gut health. And so we were kind of talking offline. We didn't really want to go too in depth into it, but it is really important. So if you took an antibiotic, maybe you were doing fine in maintenance and then you got sick and then you took an antibiotic and now you're struggling to maintain your weight, or you're struggling with more carb cravings, or you're getting really bloated after a meal. That can be a sign that maybe gut health should be addressed, to reinoculate your gut with some healthy bacteria so that you can better digest and assimilate the nutrients that you are eating. So I think that that is also an important contributor for like just the baseline physical weight loss plateaus. From an energy standpoint too, that's honestly, I think, so important and overlooked. Like calories do matter. I wish they didn't, but they do. And insulin matters, but calories matter too.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't think it's an either or conversation. I think it's a both and when we're talking about nutrition, like low insulin, low inflammation food, and maintaining some sort of energy deficit over time being like the key word, because you can't just like do it for 2 to 3 weeks, be frustrated, and then go back to your old habits. So I think those would be the other things that I contribute to that physical part of the conversation. Hydration, of course, is important too. And the other thing I wanted to talk with you about is, okay, if it's a physical weight loss plateau, what would you suggest on like a macronutrient breakdown? Do you suggest they lower their carb intake or raise their protein intake, or like what are your kind of go-to suggestions or more common suggestions for that?
That's a great question, and it really depends on the individual. If it's a guy or a gal, how active they are, their age, what type of medications they're on. So I would say that we don't have a one size fits all recommendation. If I were to try to talk on that, though, I'd probably say on average, we might reduce their carbs a little bit. We make sure that they're not just getting too much fat, because sometimes we think, well, fat doesn't raise blood glucose, it doesn't raise our insulin levels. And the thing is when we get all of the fat that we need through our diet, we don't really have any need to burn the stored stuff. So we just need to, make sure, and it's the same thing you're saying, like create a bit of a deficit, right? So if we're just getting a ton of fat in there, a ton of energy dense calories, then it can stall things. So we look at that and make sure they're getting adequate protein, making sure that it's not carbs in there, too many carbs in there for the individual, depending on activity level, age, and gender, and then look at fats. So that's usually what we do.
And I know like with activity level, we typically recommend for carbohydrates, like eat your carbs around your activity, because that's really when your muscles are going to soak them in, and it'll lower the insulin response related to those carbs. Eating them at the end of the meal can help with the blood sugar response, like after the fat and the protein. But you mentioned gender and age too. So can you kind of just clarify, like if a woman's listening or a man's listening and they're like, how would that affect my carbs?
Yeah, unfortunately, us women, especially when we're postmenopausal, we tolerate carbs a little bit differently than men of the same age. So we just have to be a little bit more diligent and more aware of them. So that's something that we look at. And then when we're younger, we usually can tolerate them a bit more than when we're older. So that's what I mean by that. What about you? Do you look at that when you're considering?
Similar, especially the postmenopausal women. Yeah, you'll hear a lot like women go through menopause and like, I'm not eating any differently, I'm not exercising any differently, and I just put on like 30 pounds overnight. And, I don't need to explain hormonally what happens here, but in a nutshell, your insulin goes up and your cortisol goes up. And so when those hormones are up, it makes weight gain very easy and weight loss very difficult. And so I think focusing on stress reduction, especially in midlife, can be really helpful, because when your estrogen tanks out from your ovaries, the adrenal glands produce some estrogen and your fat cells produce some estrogen. And if your adrenals are, pumping out all this cortisol and there's not as much capacity for the estrogen production, well, that makes your fat cells more valuable to your body for the estrogen that they produce, because your ovaries don't do it anymore. And so I like to explain to people, like, if you're stressed out, it doesn't matter how many calories you cut, how many carbs you cut, it's still going to be very difficult for you to lose weight.
Yeah, for both men and women, but more difficult for women for sure.
Like, why would I want to get rid of this fat? That's how I'm getting my hormones. And the other thing that people don't often recognize is that when fat is burned, water is released. And so they take hydration for granted, and they just, they don't drink enough water. And I like to explain to them, well, if you want to release fat, you have to signal to your body that you have an ample supply of water, so it doesn't have to hold on to the water reserves found in the fat cells. So I think that's really helpful. But what are some other tips that you have on hydration and just why that is so important to address for physical weight loss plateaus?
Yeah, I mean, exactly what you said. And when we're dehydrated, our metabolism doesn't work as efficiently as it would otherwise. Look, you're drinking water as a result.
Yeah,
We're
I
talking
drink
about water.
all day long. I usually have like two or three types just to mix it up.
Yeah, when I was working on my PhD in our weight management lab, we had a study going on looking at the impact of water intake on total fat loss. And so there were two groups of middle aged people on a low calorie diet. And there was one group who consumed 16 ounces of water 30 minutes before breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And then there was the non water control group who just drank as they usually do. And the water group lost significantly more weight than the non-water group. So 11 pounds versus 15.5 pounds for the over 12 weeks for the group who drank the water. And so their thought there as to why that happened is because the people had less appetite. They were more satiated with what they did eat. And there's something in there, probably what we just said, that when we're dehydrated, our metabolism doesn't work as efficiently. We can see our body just shuts down as well. You know, there's a study looking at basketball players and found that when they were just 2% dehydrated, their performance significantly suffered. So yeah, we need to drink our fluids. And I would say starting out first thing in the morning, drinking 16 ounces of water because we usually dehydrate a little bit when we sleep. I always suggest adding some electrolytes in there to some of the water that we're consuming, especially when we're losing weight. And that's actually why I created an electrolyte supplement, because I felt that was missing for us in the weight loss area, because I think there are specific things that could help us stay hydrated and help us through our weight loss journey. And then just monitoring urine color, right? It should be pale and light and not strongly smelling. So if it's not that, then you might want to consider drinking some more fluids.
Yes. And I think one other thing that I thought about from a physical standpoint, it's not just about the macros. It's not just about the calories. It's also about food quality.
Mm-hmm.
So, can you talk a bit about your standpoint on whole foods versus processed foods and how that may contribute to weight loss resistance or plateaus?
I mean, in general, processed foods aren't giving us what our body needs. That wasn't really made for human consumption. So we're not going to feel as satiated. Our body is really, really brilliant. I mean, more brilliant than we are,
Amazing.
right?
I
Yeah.
know. It's so
And so it's just like, what the heck are you giving me? I'm not satiated. I didn't really acknowledge or recognize that I was fed anything but calories that will go into this fat mass because I don't know what else to do with it.
Mhm.
So it is important to think about what we were designed to fuel ourselves with. And it's not this processed food. So when we eat this nutrient dense whole food diet, then our body is like, yes, I'm getting the nutrients I need. I don't need more. You can think of it that when we're fueling ourselves with these processed foods, our body is still starving inside.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of these foods, I share it in this simple way that, you know, our food comes in, this processed food, and when we eat above our carb tolerance level, it comes in and it fills up the fat stores. And so
Hmm.
our body doesn't really recognize we've been fed. We're still starving in our side. Our body's saying, feed me, please. And so if we can eat these nutrient dense foods that we've been talking about, then our body becomes satiated with less. Our cells have what they need. And I think it can help to quiet the food noise and the food chatter.
Yeah. All right. Anything else you wanted to add to the conversation? This was super
Not for me.
fun.
I just really appreciate your time and your insights. I think weight loss plateaus can be super frustrating, so that I hope we've shed some light on them and that we can bust through some plateaus that might be happening with this episode.
Yes. And if you do, like if you guys have had value from our content, either, Dr. Ashley's podcast or YouTube channel or mine, just leave them in the comments because that is a really important way to show your support for our channels. It's a really important way to build community on YouTube to let people know they're not alone. So if you've had a plateau, let us know what worked for you to break it. And if you're at a plateau, let us know what strategy you're going to use from the episode to try to break it.
Love it. Thank you, Dr. Nolte.
Thank you.
Okay, you guys, I hope that you got a lot of great actionable items, tips, tricks to bust through any kind of weight loss plateau, if you know someone who's struggling with their own weight loss, then please share this episode with them. If you're listening to this on a podcast platform, please leave a review. If you are watching this on YouTube, drop a comment below. I love to read and answer your comments. Like Dr. Nolte said, share with us what you've done to bust through any kind of weight loss plateau. Or if you're struggling with one right now, what tips and tricks from the show are you going to implement into your own life? Remember, you've got to step up to make the change. Lead with your heart, train your mind, and do not negotiate with your body. I'll see you next time.